Okay, good morning, everybody. So we last completed chapter 9 at the end of our last class. We left off sort of in the middle of a story, a little cliffhanger-ish type ending to chapter 9, where Shemuel and Shaul meet up. Shaul has this long, winding road to get to Shemuel. We learned a lot about his character with his lost donkeys and his pursuit of Shemuel. Shemuel already knew that Shaul was coming because Hashem told him. And they meet up together, and Shemuel has a private conversations, a few of them, with Shaul, presumably telling him that he's going to be the first king of the Jewish people. That's really where we left off at the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10 opens with Shemuel anointing Shaul as the king, but doing so in private, not in front of anybody. And we won't find that he will be publicly coronated as king until the very end of this chapter, until the end of chapter 10. Why does it happen in this way, that Shaul is chosen by God and everything happens in private before it ends up becoming sort of public knowledge? Well, I think it's important for Shaul to prepare him for the melucha, right? You don't just publicly pick somebody, and what if he doesn't want it? Like, he needs to be sort of molded and trained and given the proper time to prepare mentally for that moment. But at the same time, Shemuel does not want it to become public knowledge until he's ready to divulge who is chosen and to do it in a very specific way. So hence, Shaul is being chosen by God and by Shemuel, but as we'll see later in the chapter, he's going to do it by lottery. Now, in the end of the day, we know it's going to be Shaul, but he wants to do it as a lottery in front of the people to portray to give the impression that it's all being done in fairness and that Hashem is the one who's choosing it, not Shemuel. If Shemuel were to just come in front of the Jewish people and say, "Here's your king," the people are going to be like, "Well, hold it, Shemuel. How do we know that you're making the right choice? What did you do to base this on? How do we know?" They're going to start questioning him. So there's a little bit of a charade, so to speak, going on over here, misdirection, if you will, from the part of Shemuel as to how Shaul is being chosen, until we'll see it at the end of this chapter. So we open chapter 10, Pasuk Aleph. Vayikach Shemuel et pach hashemen. Shemuel takes the jar of oil, which is customarily used to anoint the king. Vayitzok al rosho vayishakehu, and he pours it on his head and he kisses Shaul. Vayomer, he says to him, Halo ki mishachacha Adonai al nahalato lenagid. Behold, that I have crowned you, I have anointed you in the name of God upon his inheritance, lenagid, to be a ruler over his people. Verse 2 begins a series of signs, otot, that Shemuel gives to Shaul to show him that this is from God. If Shaul has any doubts, which we don't see that he expresses any doubts, but if Shaul has any doubts as to the power of him being chosen and that it happened from God, Shemuel is going to give him 3 signs after he departs from Shemuel's company that will prove to him that he has in fact been chosen by God to be the next king of the Jewish people. What are those 3 signs? Verse 2, Pasuk Bet. Shemuel tells him, when you depart my company today, you will find, or you will encounter, 2 men by the tombstone of Rahel, by Kever Rahel, Bigvul Binyamin, which is found in the portion area of Binyamin. And these 2 people will say to you, your donkeys, which you have gone out to seek and to find, have been found. And behold, your father has stopped being concerned about your donkeys, and instead his worry and concern is about you, that you have not returned home. Lemor, saying, what will I do about my son? What happened to my son? So this is the first sign that this is from God, that Shaul is going to encounter these 2 men by the tombstone of Rachel, who will inform him about the found donkeys and the fact that his father is now worried about Shaul's whereabouts as opposed to the donkey's whereabouts. Just notice for a minute, a nice little sensitive point is that the 2 men will say that Shaul's father was worried about whom? About him, about his son. Think back to when in chapter 9, when Shaul said to his young boy, he said, my dad is going to worry about about us, not just about me, about us. In reality, who is Shaul's father really caring about? He cares about his son. The servant boy isn't exactly his top priority. But Shaul, in sensitivity to his servant boy, did not want to say, hey, my father's going to really be worried about where I am. Yeah, nobody cares about you. They only care about me. No, Shaul, in his sensitivity towards other people, said, my father's going to be worried about us. Well, yeah, but so Da'ag lachem worried about you, but in reality, he's worried about your whereabouts, but he cares mostly about Shaul. But Shaul didn't present it like that to his servant. He presented it in a nicer way to make the servant feel wanted. Just a small little change, but shows you Shaul's sensitivity to people. So that's sign number 1. What about sign number 2? Verse 3. V'chalafta misham, you're going to pass on from there. V'hala, and go forward. Ubata ad elon Tabor, and you're going to come to the terebinth of Tabor. This could be like a certain place, a certain area, an inn. Umtsa'ucha sham shelosha anashim. This time you're going to find 3 people, olim el ha'elohim bet el, who are on their way up to God, to the house of God, bet el. Echad noseh shlosha gedayim. One of them is accompanied by 3 kids, goats, meaning baby goats. Ve'echad noseh sheloshet kikerot lechem. The other one is carrying 3 loaves of bread. Ve'echad noseh nevel yain. And the third is going to be carrying a jar of wine. Shemuel is predicting to him what he'll be seeing. Verse 4, V'sha'alu lecha leshalom. You're going to greet these people. They will greet you and ask how you're doing. V'natenu lecha shte lechem. They're going to give you 2 of the 3 loaves of bread. Ve'lakachta miyadam. And you'll take it from them. That's sign number 2, that this is going to take place. Okay, very interesting. What about sign number 3, verse 5? Aharken, after this is done, tavo giv'at ha'elohim. You will come to the mountain of God. I think it's Rashi over here interprets the mountain of God means Kiryat Ye'arim, where the Aron HaKodesh is. Remember, think back to the fact that Aron HaKodesh is in hiding now. We still haven't uncovered where the Aron HaKodesh is. And we know where it is, but we haven't released it again. It's still out in that guy's home, kind of out in hiding. We won't bring it back until the time of David. So he's going to come to this place, Giv'at HaElohim, Asher Sham Netzive Pelishtim, and there too are the Philistine prefects, right? The leaders of the Pelishtim, which makes sense because Kiryat Ye'arim and the Pelishtim are sort of bordering each other. Vihi kevo'acha sham ha'ir, and when you reach that city, ufaga'ata hevel nevi'im, you're going to encounter a group of prophets, yordim mehabbama, who are descending from the altar. Velifnehem nevel vetof vehalil vechinor, and in front of them are many different musical instruments. A nevel is a lyre, tof are cymbals or timbrels, halil is a flute, and a kinor is a harp. You'll basically meet up with these prophets. We'll have a whole orchestra in front of them. Vehema mitnabbe'im, and these prophets will be experiencing prophecy. What will happen, says Shemuel in verse 6, V'tzalaha alecha ruach Adonai, and the Spirit of God will come upon you, Shaul, v'hitnabeta imam, and you will give prophecy together with them. You will experience nevu'ah. V'nehepachta leish acher, and by doing so, you will transform into a new individual. Your life will never be the same once you've experienced an opportunity of nivu'ah. Until this point, obviously, he has not been a Navi. He has not received communication from God. He'll have some kind of a spiritual awakening, this nivu'ah that he'll experience. And from that point on, he will be ish ahed. He'll be a new person. You can imagine that someone who goes through an experience as intense as nivu'ah would then, be a very, very different individual. Okay. Shemuel wraps up the discussion by verse 7. Once these signs have happened to you, you can act as the occasion arises, for God is with you. In other words, from this point, from that moment on, once you receive nivu'ah, you're on your own. You're the king, you're the guy. You have free reign to act as you will, as you please, because God is with you. Except, says Shemuel, There's one condition. Shemuel gives Shaul instruction, not for now, but that will take place in a few chapters from now. This, what Shemuel is about to tell Shaul is not for his immediate knowledge right now. It's something that it's a message for him to hold with him for a little bit of a while. What's going to happen? Shemuel says, you have free reign to do what you want, except there's going to be a battle that we're going to fight against the Philistine at a place called Gilgal. And here is my command to you about that battle. He says, V'yaradta, verse 8, V'yaradta lifanai ha-Gilgal, you will, at one point in time, go ahead of me to this place, Gilgal, where we're going to fight a war against the Philistine. He doesn't say that here, but we know it's going to happen later. V'hineh anochi yored elecha. But before you engage in battle, I'm going to come and meet you. Leha'alot olot, in order to offer up sacrifices to God in preparation for the war. Lizboah zivhei shelamim, to give offerings of peace to God. Now, here's his commandment. Shiv'at yamim tohel ad bo'i elecha. Be sure to wait exactly 7 days until I arrive, which means Shaul will be with his army at this place, Gilgal, for a period of 7 days, awaiting the battle against the Philistine. And Shemuel is telling Shaul, do nothing. Just wait for me. 7 days, wait for me until I get there. Once I get there, we'll offer up our sacrifices, and then you can engage in battle. That is Shemuel's command to Shaul. V'hodati lecha et asher ta'aseh. And once that happens, then I will tell you what you need to do. Your job as king will go into effect. So Shemuel is telling Shaul, look, you're going to have free reign. Once these signs happen to you, you're a new person. You're going to have control to do as you please. I ask you one thing. We're going to engage in this very important battle. Wait there 7 days for me till I give the sacrifices. Then I'll instruct you further, and then you're on your own. This is Shemuel's command. This part of the story we will not see come to fruition until chapter 13. So we have to keep this story in the back of our minds for several weeks until chapter 13. In chapter 13, we will find that Shaul will not follow Shemuel's instructions. He will not follow. He will almost follow, I should say. I shouldn't say he will not follow. He almost follows it. He waits the 7 days, and then it's almost like with the Jewish people waiting Moshe to come down, very similar type thing. We'll mention it in more depth there, but almost like the Jewish people miscalculating and waiting, and they're like, how come Moshe isn't late? Shaul is going to wait the 7 days, but in his calculation, it almost seems like Shemuel is late, and he thinks he's not coming. The people are going to get antsy and restless, and they're going to push Shaul to give the sacrifices early before Shemuel gets there. And when Shemuel arrives, he says, what have you done? I gave you one instruction, and you couldn't keep it. And Shaul is going to try to make excuses why he didn't do it. We'll wait for the story that ends up happening there. But this is the first command that Shemuel gives to Shaul, and it's going to have to be put on hold, a little bit of a pause, until we read about the story in a couple of chapters from now. Okay. Yeah, and if you think that knowing how to count things is easy, right? Just look at what we've been doing for the last year and a half. I always tell people, right? How do you count the days and this and that? Yeah. How do I count from the time I had symptoms, from the time I had the test? Was it this? Was it that? But I did 4 days already, and I'm done. When's my quarantine over? How do I count the 90 days from when I was diagnosed? It was this. So for everybody who's ever learned about counting days and how come the rabbis can't figure it out, all you need to do is look at the last year and a half and know why nobody could figure it out. There you go. What the rules are, nobody knows. Anyway, verse 9. Verse 9 wraps up this idea. V'haya kafnoto shichmo lalechet me'im Shemuel. And it was when Shaul turned his shoulder around to walk away from Shemuel, vayahafoch lo Elohim lev acher. Even before any of these signs took place, already Shaul turns his back on Shemuel to walk away, and God has already filled him with a new heart. God has already transformed him into a new person simply from this encounter with Shemuel. And indeed, the text tells us All three of these signs took place on that day, as Shemuel predicted, as a vote of confidence to Shaul that he, in fact, has been chosen by God to be the king. Now, before we continue to the next one, which describes in a little bit more depth the episode of Shaul and those prophets when he received Nevu'ah, we have to just take a pause for a minute and take a step back and explain what are these three signs? Is there any symbolism in them? Why are they here? What is their purpose? What's going on over here, right? It's not uncommon for leaders who have been chosen to receive signs that they are in fact the leader. Can you recall a situation in which a person who was chosen to be a leader asked for some kind of sign from God that he is to be the leader of the Jewish people? Yeah, let's go back to Moshe, right? Moshe does when he's chosen to be the leader, and he's given the arduous task of going down to Mitzrayim and telling the Jewish people God has chosen to take him out. What does he say? He says to God, "Vehen lo ya'aminuni," they won't believe me. Give me a sign. And God gives him how many signs? He gives him 3 signs, right? The first sign is the staff turning into the snake. The second one is his hand turning into leprosy. And there's actually a third sign that nobody really pays attention to, which is that he's going to turn the river into blood. That's actually one of the 3 signs that he was meant to do to the Jewish people. Now there, it doesn't say dip your staff in the river and have the Nile turn to blood. It says you'll draw water from the Nile, pour it on the ground, and you'll see it turn to blood on the ground. So it's a slightly different sign than the actual plague of blood, but a sign nevertheless. He receives 3 signs. There was another person who also received signs when he was chosen. Think of the book of Shoftim. Anyone? He had it and he asked for it multiple times. Gideon, very good, yeah. Gideon, right? When Gideon is chosen to be the leader of the Jewish people, he says, God, here is this sheet of wool, right? Let the dew fall all around it and not on the sheet of wool. And then the next day he wakes up and it's exactly that way. And he says, God, not enough. Now let's do the reverse. Let the sheet of wool be soaked and everything around it will be dry. And he asks a few times for signs, and God goes ahead and gives him those signs, right? Now, what is different about the signs that Moshe receives and the signs that Gideon receives from the signs that Shaul received over here? Bingo, very good, right? Shaul does not request those signs as opposed to Moshe and Gideon requesting those signs. Is that a positive on Shaul or a negative on Shaul?
Does it mean he has less humility than the others did because he thinks he's worthy and the other ones didn't think they were worthy?
Does he have less humility? So you're saying, you're interpreting that the request for a sign is a show of humility, that I might not be worthy and I want to make sure. And Shaul, because he thinks he's worthy, doesn't need the signs necessarily. It's not a bad thought. It's not a bad thought. Here's my problem with that approach. My problem is that we've seen time and again, and we will continue to see time and again through the last chapter and this chapter, that Shaul is a model of humility, right? We'll see that in a moment. He'll have a conversation with his uncle about what happened with Shemuel, and he won't even tell him that he was crowned king. Later in the chapter, we will see that when they pick the lottery, that Shaul is the king. They look for Shaul, and he's not there. He's hiding because he doesn't want to be in the public eye. So I would agree with your assessment if Shaul was not this major model of humility. But we see that Shaul, time and again, is a great model for humility. So I'm hesitant to explain that his lack of request is because he finds himself to be worthy. I'm not so sure that that's how I would interpret it. It's a good, it makes sense, but it doesn't fit necessarily with Shaul's overall persona. That's what I think it is. That's what I think it is. I think it's a sign of greatness of Shaul that he's a ma'amin. Whereas, by the way, Moshe wasn't not ma'amin for himself, but he was not ma'amin for the Jewish people. He said, the Jewish people won't believe me. And Gideon also isn't sure that he's really there. So there's a sense of humility definitely on the part of Moshe and Gideon, but there's a step back of hesitation because of their lack of confidence, their lack of faith in what's happening over here. versus Shaul, who lacks no faith. He lacks no emunah. And so I think it's a positive on Shaul that he does not request these signs, but instead they're given to him by Shemuel. Who, Shaul? That's sort of what Lisa was saying before, but he's saying, but like not from a standpoint of arrogance. Moshe definitely did not feel worthy. He rebuffs God constantly, but I don't think Shaul felt worthy either. I think Shaul, you'll see from his behavior, also is very, very humble. I don't think it has anything to do with humility as much as it has to do with emunah in what's being told, an acceptance of faith in what Shemuel is telling him versus what Moshe and Gidon had, which was lacking either faith in the Jewish people or faith in God to a certain extent. Yeah. Who, Moshe and Gidon? But then Shaul doesn't have much experience. Maybe. There's a little bit more there, you're saying. Gidon, I don't know how much more Shaul has to play with than Gidon already has to play with. I get Moshe because it's really before any of the revelations, but Gidon and Shaul are, I think, a little bit on the same wavelength as much. Yeah. Correct. There's a missing detail there. Uh-huh. Oh, so meaning you want to say that maybe in fact Shaul did ask for it and it just was omitted from the That's an interesting theory. I can't disprove that theory, right? I can't disprove it. But going in a different direction from that, I think also the fact that Shaul does not request the signs means that the signs are being given by Shemuel. Shemuel is the initiator of the signs, which means that now we can say that maybe Shemuel is purposely giving him these signs because he wants to send a message to Shaul, right? The Nevuah, I wouldn't say is miraculous. It's definitely raising him up, but maybe not miraculous. Interesting. They're also, so qualitatively, they're a little bit different. More detailed. Yeah, and also you're reliant on other people, right? In other words, the signs that Moshe and Gidon do is just between them and God. All of a sudden, Shemuel's signs involve interacting with other people. So on that note, I think that Shemuel with these signs is trying to illustrate something to Shaul. Firstly, isn't it interesting that the first sign takes place where? Where does the first sign take place? At Kever Rachel, right? Kever Rachel, Rachel is the mother of Binyamin. That's the tribe where Shaul emanates from. So part of what Shaul could be teaching Shemuel is, no, if you're thinking, what zichut, what merit do you have to be the first king of the Jewish people? Your first sign is going to happen by your great-great-great-grandmother's tombstone. That's your merit. Your merit is that you come from Rachel, you come from the tribe of Binyamin, and that's why you're Zocheh, being the favorite wife of Yaakov Avinu, to be the first king of the Jewish people. Draw strength from Rachel and her kindness and her greatness as you take your rightful position as the king of the Jewish people. One small idea that Shemuel could be conveying to Shaul. Another interesting thing that you notice about the signs is the signs gradually increase in a number of different ways. Think about the number of people. In the first sign, it's 2 people. In the second sign, 3 people. In the fourth sign, it's a group of people, number 1. The second is the quality of these people. In the first sign, it's 2 random basic people. In the second sign, it's 3 people who are going to the Har HaElohim. They're going to the house of God. These are religiously inclined individuals, spiritual people. They're going to Bet El. They could be Kohanim. They could be Leviim. They're important people. And they're the ones who are giving you the bread. And then in the third sign, who are these people? They're Nevi'im. They're prophets of God. So we're seeing both a quantitative and qualitative increase from sign to sign in the people themselves. Another thing that we see is that they give him gifts, right? Which is very interesting. The second sign is they're going to provide him with food, right? That's a very important hint to Shaul, because anytime somebody voluntarily gives food to somebody, they're crowning them as a very important individual. Think about, for example, when Avraham Avinu wins the war in the 4 kings against the 5 kings, and Melchizedek comes out and takes bread and wine, and he gives 1/10 of everything that he has to Avraham, and he gives Avraham food and wine. What does he say? Baruch Avram la'el elyon. Blessed is Avram to God, right? How great is Avraham? And so when somebody wants to tout another individual, wants to raise them up and glorify them, offering them food is a big deal. So the fact that these 3 people will offer him 2 loaves of bread shows again that they are recognizing something special about Shaul. And of course, ending off, Shaul is going to receive nivu'ah, prophecy, which again raises him up from everybody. This is in stark contrast to what we'll see at the end of the chapter. After Shaul is publicly crowned as king, there will be a group of people who don't wish to accept him, and they won't bring him anything, won't bring him any gifts. They're going to reject Shaul. What?
Do they have like reason or just?
We'll try to explain what their reasoning might be, but don't worry, they'll be punished eventually for not recognizing Shaul as the king. So there's a lot here to sort of pull apart as we're looking at these different signs, and ultimately the purpose of the signs is to show Shaul that he's going to grow, and eventually by the end of it, he's a different person. Shemuel is telling Shaul, by undertaking this responsibility to be the king of the Jewish people, your life will never be the same. You are now going to step into an arena that will change your life forever. You are now an ish aher, a new person, both internally and externally, in terms of your relationship with God. Everything about you is now different. You have taken on a totally new persona that you're going to have to embrace if you're going to be successful in this role as king.
Could he have said no?
That's an interesting question. Could Shaul have said no?
Did anybody ever say no when they were appointed king?
Not that we see, not that we find. I wonder what it would have been. It's clear that Shaul, Moshe says no, but he's not being chosen as king. It's clear that Shaul is somewhat uncomfortable with the notion that he's going to be king, as we'll see when he's chosen through the lottery and he's hiding in the corner and nobody can find him. He's clearly not comfortable with the notion, but it doesn't seem like you have the right, when God determines that you're going to be the king and you're being chosen, to say, no, I'm not going to step into that role. It doesn't sound like you have that opportunity to do so, at least the way we're reading it. But it's not, we don't know, because the text never records anybody who had that sort of a give and take back and forth with God or the Navi and says, I don't want to be the king. We'll have quite the opposite. We'll have people who want to be king and will be told you can't be the king, but we don't find too often or ever anybody saying, I don't want to be the king, and being forced against their will to be the king. That doesn't seem to be the situation. Okay, let's continue forward in the chapter. And we're going to read 2 little epilogues here to the signs that Shemuel gave. We're in verse 10. Vayavo Sham HaGiv'ata. The Torah, the Navi now tells us a little bit about that incident where he receives his prophecy. Vayavo Sham HaGiv'ata. They come to the mountain of God. And indeed, he finds this group of prophets coming out to greet him. And the Spirit of God comes upon him. And Shaul indeed receives prophecy among these prophets. Now, the prophets who see Shaul receiving prophecy are stricken. They're very surprised. People don't typically join their group and all of a sudden have prophecy just like that. That's something that's very surprising to them. Not to mention, these people knew Shaul the day before, right? They knew him. They knew who he was. He had never once ever received prophecy before. So anybody who knew Shaul from the days prior, and they saw, behold, he is prophesying together with this group of prophets. The people looked at each other, stunned. What's going on with the son of Kish, Shaul? Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im? Is Shaul among the prophets all of a sudden? How did this happen? Verse 12, Vaya'an ish misham vayomer. A man who was overhearing this said to them, Umi avihim, and who are their fathers? Al ken hayta lemashal. Therefore, it became a proverb to say, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im. Is Shaul among the prophets? What is happening over here? Strange little two verses over here, right? I mean, what did you gather? What can you say definitively? Shaul gets prophecy. Clearly, the people are surprised at the fact that he gets prophecy. What happened from yesterday to today that all of a sudden Shaul is able to receive prophecy? What is this idea of this parable, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im? And what does the man mean when he says to them, Umi avihim? Who are their fathers? Right? What does he mean by that? What is he trying to express? Umi avihim. Who are their fathers? What is he trying to say? So one way that I read this was, what the man is saying is he's actually answering their question about prophecy, right? The men are saying, what happened to Ben Kish? What happened to the son of Kish? Notice how they refer to Shaul. They refer to him not by his name. They refer to him as the son of his father's name. They say, what happened to him that all of a sudden he became a prophet, right? And they refer to him by his father's name. What does the man answer? He says, well, who are your fathers? Or who are their fathers? In other words, what's the fault here? You think that prophecy comes to a person based on who his father is, right? You think that you have to be from some kind of lineage or family to be destined for prophecy. That you say to him, what happened to the son of Kish all of a sudden that he became a prophet? And who's your fathers? What, did you become prophets because of your fathers? The answer is, just like you made yourself available for prophecy, you must have grown yourself to a spiritual level that is prepared to receive the divine communication. It must be that that's what Shaul did for himself. Regardless of who his father is, regardless of where he comes from, he must have all of a sudden elevated himself to a point where he can go ahead and receive Nibu'ah. And that was the back and forth that they had, which teaches a powerful lesson that Nibu'ah is dependent on the individual. It's about the individual making himself available and ready to receive the divine word, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. He must have all of these things click in to have a connection with God, to be able to receive the divine word. It's regardless of who his father is, what his family is, or where he comes from. It's all dependent on the Navi himself. The phrase Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im is basically a phrase, a metaphor that people use when they see somebody who all of a sudden elevates himself to a higher class that he was not previously in, but he did it to himself. So all of a sudden, Shaul was not amongst the prophets, and he finds himself prophesying. They say, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im, is Shaul amongst the prophets? Wow, he elevated himself. So this becomes a phrase that they say typically whenever somebody enters into a higher level than they once had the day before, right? The person would win the lottery, and all of a sudden now they're in the high elite, strata of society. They say, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im, oh, well, welcome. You're in now you elevated yourself overnight to a new status, right? So when a person's status changes that quickly, that's the phrase Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im. An interesting little tidbit that the text tells us over here. The question is, why is this important for us? Why do we care about this? And why does the text have to teach us the phrase Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im? Why is that important? So I'd like to take you fast forward just a bit. If you have a Tanakh in front of you, fast forward to chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 23 and 24. This is the only other time this phrase Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im appears. So it makes sense for us to combine these two stories, because the text over here is clearly teaching us this phrase to alert us to the fact that it might appear later on in other contexts. Go to chapter 19, verse 23, and we find that it indeed does appear. Let me give you a quick background of what we're talking about here in chapter 19. This is already when Shaul has been debunked from being the king. David is ready to take over. Shaul has been overcome by a ruach ra'ah, by an evil spirit which has him possessed to believe that David is a terrible person and he must kill him. So Shaul is chasing David all over the place, trying to kill David. Okay? The text tells us in verse 23, Vayelech Sham el Nayot. He goes to a place called Nayot in Ramah. Vatehi alav gamhu ruach Elohim. And at that moment, the Spirit of God comes upon Shaul. Vayelech haloch vayitnabeh. And he continues to walk and he begins to have prophecy. Ad bo'o benayot baramah. Until he reaches the place known as Nayot in Ramah. What does he do with this prophecy? Vayivshat gamhu begadav. He strips himself of his clothing. Vayitnabeh gamhu lifnei Shemuel. And he prophesies in front of Shemuel. Vayipol arom, and he falls naked. Kol hayom hahu v'chol halayla, all day and all night. Al ken yomeru, for this reason is why the people say, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im, is Shaul amongst the prophets? What does this story mean? Equally strange, huh? This is not, would you say this is a glorified moment for Shaul or not? No, I would not say that this is one of Shaul's high points. Although seems like from the text he's receiving some sort of divine prophecy, he's having a hard time processing it. He's rolling around naked all night long in front of the prophet Shemuel. It's a little strange. And on this they say, is Shaul amongst the Nevi'im? So Rav Amnon Bazak has an interesting take on this. He says that in chapter 19, Shaul is trying to get Nivu'ah, but he doesn't actually accomplish it. The Spirit of God is he's trying to elicit the Spirit of God to come on to him. He's trying to get it to convey something to him, but he can't do it. He's lost his ability now that he has this demon possessing him to kill David, and he's fallen out of God's good graces. He's lost the ability to muster up prophecy, which was the exact opposite from when he started out his tenure, where he was able to prepare himself to receive nivu'ah at the drop of a hat. And so the phrase Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im is equally striking in both places. When he first receives his nivu'ah, because he clicked in to be able to receive nivu'ah, he prepared himself to receive that prophecy, and everyone's shocked. Wow, Shaul elevated himself. And just as quickly, he downgraded himself by the end. By chapter 19, the people are like, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im. Okay, now we know why Shaul wasn't amongst the Nevi'im. He lost himself, right? This phrase, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im, is sort of the bookend of Shaul's rise and fall. That's what it represents. This is Shaul's, in chapter 10, it's Shaul's glory moment. He's chosen as king. He's elevated into the status of prophecy. He has a communication with God, unbelievable. And the second time it's mentioned in chapter 19 is when he's on his way out. He's been debunked. And that's, this sort of bookends that idea. It shows you the greatness of Shaul, but also the downfall of Shaul, his rise and fall in one phrase, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im. Any thoughts or anything to add on that? It's interesting. What happened between 10 and 19 is what we're going to have to explore now over the next several months. Yes. So a lot's going to happen between 10 and 19, but it's worth knowing that 10 and 19, right? Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im, this phrase is sort of indicative of the rise and fall of someone as great as Shaul. And maybe that's why the text is going out of its way to foreshadow it for us, or to at least have it resonate in our minds till the next time that we go ahead and see it. Let's move now to verse 13, the second epilogue off of these three signs. Verse 13, the prophecy stops, and now they come to the bama, they come to the altar. Vayomer dod Shaul elav, the uncle of Shaul says to him, ve'el na'aro, and to his servant boy, an halachtem, where were you? Finally, they return home. Vayomer levakesh et ha'atanot, he says, I was coming to seek the donkeys, I was looking for them. Vanir'eh ki ayin, and I saw that I couldn't find them. I don't know where they are. Vanavo el Shemuel, so we ended up by the prophet Shemuel to see what happened. Vayomer dod Shaul, and dod Shaul says to them, Hagida nali, please tell me, ma amar lachem Shemuel, what did Shemuel say to you? Vayomer Shaul el dodo, Shaul says to his uncle, Haged higid nanu ki nimtziu ha'atonot. Shemuel told us that somebody found the atonot. That's what the prophet told us. That's it. That's where he cuts the conversation. Says the text of the Navi. Now the author interjects. Ve'ed devar hamenucha lo higid lo. Shaul did not reveal the concept of he was crowned king by Shemuel to his uncle. Asher amar Shemuel. Lo higid lo asher amar Shemuel. He did not tell him the matter of the kingship. He did not say to him, Asher amar Shemuel, that which Shemuel had said. So what do we see here, right? Shaul now has this conversation with his uncle about the donkeys and leaves out the idea of the kingship. What does that tell us about Shaul? He wasn't ready to share. Why not? So maybe it's not. Shaul knows that it's going to fall on deaf ears. They're just going to laugh him off if he says that he became the king.
Also, maybe because he was given the instructions, wait until this happens.
Okay.
He wasn't supposed to.
So I'm glad you brought that up, right? So Esther brings up maybe Shaul was told not to tell anybody, right? Do we see that he was told not to tell anybody? We don't see that he was told not to tell anybody, but look at the last three words of verse 16. It says, "Et devar hamelucha lo higid lo," the matter of the kingship he did not tell him, Asher amad Shemuel, that which Shemuel had said. What does that mean, Asher amad Shemuel? Those last three words. It's a very strange way of phrasing it. You could understand it in one of two ways. What are you saying, Liz? Right. In other words, like, "Et devar hamelucha lo higid lo," he did not tell him the matter which of the kingship, Asher amad Shemuel, in accordance with what Shemuel told him, commanding him not to say anything, which makes sense, by the way. We know that Shemuel is very nervous about this knowledge about Shaul becoming king getting out. That's why he crowned him privately. That's why he spoke to him on the roof. Shemuel has maintained secrecy around this coronation of Shaul. So it makes sense that Shemuel would instruct Shaul, don't tell anybody until I make it public, until I'm ready for that to happen. So one way to read this is, Shaul did not tell his uncle about him being king in accordance with the command of Shemuel. Now, what does that, if we read it that way, what does that teach us about Shaul? So far, he's obedient. Yes. No, that's very important, right? It teaches us that Shaul has the capability, despite, I'm sure, any one of us wanting to blurt out that information, none of us would be able to hold it in. Shaul has the capacity to uphold a command from Shemuel, which we're going to see how long does that last? How long can it last for Shaul to be meticulously obedient to Shemuel? Won't last very long, or not long enough, right? This is also reminiscent of what? Think about a person from the tribe of Binyamin receiving a command not to tell somebody about their identity from somebody. How does it run, Yosef? That wasn't what I was thinking about. Who told him not to tell his brothers? So nobody, it's a little bit like Yosef in the sense that Yosef did hide his identity when he could have blurted it out. He did hide his identity from his brothers, but he wasn't commanded to do so. But I think you're close. You're on the right path. Another person who hid their identity from other people at the command of somebody. Esther, right? This seems to me very reminiscent of Esther. Esther is commanded by Mordechai, don't tell anybody where you're from or who you are. And Esther maintains that secrecy in an obedient way to Mordechai. Not coincidentally, Esther is what? She is a descendant of Shaul. Our rabbis teach us she's a descendant from Shaul, from the tribe of Binyamin. She actually rectifies a lot of the issues that Shaul is plagued with in terms of killing Amalek and Haman and other things. She is considered a tikkun of sorts for Shaul. So very similar parallels between holding in a piece of information that you very much wish to expose, but being obedient to someone who told you, don't say anything. Keep it a secret until the time is right to go ahead and reveal it, and that will eventually make you to be the king, or make you be the queen, right? Both of them end up becoming royalty under the guise of some sort of secret, right? Which is very interesting. Another way of reading this, though, is simply he did not say the matter of the kingdom which Shaul had which Shemuel had bestowed upon him, right? Right? Shemuel was the one who crowned him. That's another simple way of reading it. But that basically means that either Shaul is very obedient to Shaul, Or another thing that we could say is he's very modest. The fact that he omitted the fact that he was king is because he didn't feel it relevant to tell his uncle that he was just crowned king. He's not comfortable. He doesn't want to accept that position any quicker than he has to. So either it's his obedience or his modesty on display in this little dialogue between him and his uncle. Let's wrap up the chapter. The chapter concludes finally with the public ceremony of crowning Shaul as king. That'll take us from 17 to the end of the chapter. Let's read the story together. Shemuel summons the people to come in a gathering with God in a place called Mitzpah. Are we familiar with this place? Well, who remembers where Mitzpah had appeared? When was the last time we saw Mitzpah? Anybody remember? Mitzpah was the place in chapter 7 where Shemuel had the awakening of the Jewish people. Remember when they were losing to the Philistines? They had lost the Aron and they needed to do Teshuvah. Shemuel awakened them in a spiritual revival before leading them out to war and defeating the Philistines. This happened at Mitzpah. This was the chapter right before they asked for a king. When Shemuel thought he was finally making headway with the people to get them spiritually inclined to God, they defeat the Philistines. Everything's great. And then boom, they turn around and they ask for a king, and Shemuel is like devastated, right? So isn't it ironic? Shemuel, to publicly coronate the first king, which they requested, summons the Jewish people to the Mitzpah, which was the last place where they had a spiritual awakening and connection with God before they asked for a king. What do you think he's sending them that message? He's trying to tell the people in a subtle way, you blew it, right? Remember the last time we were here, guys? Last time we were here, we did good things without a king. We didn't need the king. You had me. We did good things over here. Now you ruined it. So now what are we going to do here? We're going to crown a king according to what you guys want. Well, if they didn't get that message, Shemuel's going to make sure that they get that message. Because take a look at the next pasuk. Vayomer el bnei Israel. Now, as he gathers them in the Mitzpah, he says to the Jewish people, Ko amar Adonai Elohei Israel. Behold, so says the God, Lord of Israel. Anochi he'eleti et Israel mimitzrayim. I took you out of Egypt. Va'atzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim. And I saved you from the hands of the Egyptians. Umiyad kol hamamlachot. And from the hands of all of the kingdoms. Halochatzim etchem, who are oppressing you. Verse 19, Ve'atem hayom me'astem et Elohechem. And you today have rejected your God. You've disgraced me. Asher hu moshea etchem. He is the one who saves you. Mikol ra'otechem ve'tzarotechem, from all of the evil and all of the suffering. Vatomeru lo, and you said to God, Ki melech tasim aleinu. We don't want you, we want a king. Ve'ata hityatzevu lifnei Adonai. Now you will stand in front of God, leshivtechem u'alfechem, in order of your tribes and in order of your clans, and God is going to pick you the king that you so desperately asked for. What's the sentiment that Shemuel is saying over here? He's clearly not so happy, right? This is not the first time. It's not the second time. It won't be the last time, because he's going to do it again in chapter 12. But he once again offers rebuke to the Jewish people for asking for a king. He brings them to Mitzpah, the last place they were successful without a king, and tells them, you guys ruined this place because you asked for a king. But now God is going to choose for you a king. So he offers them that rebuke. He's saying, why is Shemuel beating a dead horse, so to speak? Yeah. He wants to drill that point home. Maybe he still thinks there's a chance that they could reverse, but doubtfully. That he's already crowned Shaul as the king. He wants to remind them of their faulty mindset when they asked for a king, right? Yes. Are you talking about in the Torah, or are you talking about here? Right. So this is the question we asked when we did chapter 8, when we said, why is Shemuel and God getting upset at them? And basically the answer in a nutshell, you can go back and look at all of the different commentaries that we saw, but the answer in a nutshell was their intentions for the king were not the same as the intentions that the Torah had in mind for the king. The Torah's intentions for a king are to be a liaison between them and God, and to be an emissary of God, but to spread more godliness. The Jewish people wanted a buffer between them and God. They wanted a king who's going to fight their battles for them, who's going to tell them what to do, not even according to the laws of the Torah. They basically needed the king to replace what they used to have with the Aron HaKodesh. Remember, we said the Aron was their buffer between them and God. Now they don't have the Aron. We're going to replace that with a king. We need something to play defense between us and God, because we can't, our relationship with God's not working out. We're not happy with it, right? And so that's why, just to add a little bit more to that point, this language, we won't have time to take a look back at it, but this language is very reminiscent of the language at the beginning of Shoftim, when this Ish HaElohim, this man, comes on the scene and starts criticizing the Jewish people about the Avodah Zarah that they're doing. Why does Shemuel use very similar language? Because he wants to tell them the fact that you asked for a king is in many ways equivalent to Avodah Zarah. You're going to worship this king and follow this king the way you did with Avodah Zarah. So it's just semantics. It's just a new name. Anything that can create a defense, a barrier between you and God and having to obey that relationship in an intense way, you'll take anything to play defense. So at one time it was Avodah Zarah. Then it was the Aron. Now you're just saying, let's put the king in between. You're just playing an intermediate. You just want something to block between you and God. And that's why he's using language which is very reminiscent of Avodah Zarah for the Jewish people. But in the end, they asked for something that the Torah allows them to have, regardless of what their intentions were. God says, I have no choice but to give it to you. He does grant them that wish. But hopefully by choosing the right person and giving them a better context, maybe it could be for the best. Because there are situations where a king can play out for the positive of the people. Let's just read to the end of the chapter now, verse 20. Shemuel brings all of the different tribes close, and he picks out a lottery. Or according to some commentaries, he asked the Urim v'Tumim, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, which tribe is the king going to come from? And who stood out? The tribe of Binyamin, not surprisingly to us. Verse 21, Vayakrev et Shevet Binyamin lemishpechotav. They then bring the tribe of Binyamin close, all of their families. Vatilached mishpachat hamatri, and was chosen from amongst those families the family of Matri, which is apparently the family of Shaul. Vayilached Shaul ben Kish, and then among them was chosen Shaul the son of Kish. Vayvakshuhu velo nimtza, and they look around to find him, and they can't find him. He's nowhere to be found. Vayishalu od badonai, so they ask the Urim v'Tumim again. Haba od halom ish, has anyone else come here? Vayomer Adonai hinehu nechba el hakelim. God responds to them, he's hiding among the baggage. In other words, he's somewhere like, he's hiding behind the utensils and the vessels and other things. Shaul is literally hiding from the position that he knows he's going to get, which is to be the king. What does this show you about Shaul? His modesty, his discomfort with the position. Now I ask you a question.
Maybe he wants to wait and see how they react before he shows up.
He wants to hedge his bets a little bit. Smart dude, smart guy. He's not necessarily going to thrust himself in there if not for that fact. But I ask you the following question. You are a member of the Jewish people. You've been waiting for a king. You've requested it. You're looking for it. They pick this, Shemuel does this dramatic ceremony. He picks first the tribe, and then he picks the family, and then he picks the father, and then he gets to the person. So you're waiting on pins and needles for the king, and when the king is picked, he's nowhere to be found. Where is he? He's hiding. How does this make you feel as a member of the Jewish people? Right. Okay, great. We chose a king who's going to fight in war. His major job is going to be to lead us in battle, and he's hiding, right, from us. It's not exactly the best vote of confidence ever, right? So look what happens. Verse 23. Vayarutzu vayikahu misham. They run over there and they grab him from where he is. Vayityatzeb betoch ha'am. And they stand him amongst the people. Vayigba mikol ha'am. And then they realize this guy he's tall, he's buff, he's an imposing figure. We know already from when we met Shaul at the beginning of chapter 9, his physical stature is very impressive. He is head and shoulders above the people. And yet they don't react right away. What happens? Shemuel says to the people, Hareitem asher bahar bo Adonai? Do you see the person who God has chosen for you? Ki en kamahu bechol ha'am. There's nobody like him in the entire people, the entire nation. Vayariu kol ha'am. And the people begin to cheer and scream and chant. Vayomeru yehi hamelech. And they say, long live the king. What did you see happen there? What did you notice? Shemuel needs to pump them up. He's hiding. You could tell the people are a little bit nervous about Shaul taking this position. They have to grab him and put him. They see his very impressive stature, but they still don't know how to react to him until Shemuel says, look, this is the best guy. And then the people say, okay. But you can imagine that there's people who are not so sure. They're a little unsettled. And hence, the final Pisukim tell us that while the majority of the people raised and were happy and screamed and celebrated, there's going to be a faction of people who this lack of unsettledness, I guess you could say, it's not really a word, but is bothering them, right? So Vaydaber Shemuel al-Ha'am et Mishpat HaMenucha. Shemuel tells the people the laws of the king. Vayichtob b'sefer, he writes it in a book. Vayanach lifnei Adonai, he places it in front of God. And Shemuel dismisses the people back to their homes. Verse 26. Interesting. Shaul says, all right, I guess I'm going home. And Shaul goes home, right? I mean, you'd expect the king at this point to be like, all right, where's my palace? You know, where am I setting up shop, right? Where's my grand procession? Where's my inauguration? Where's my White House? Where's my this? Where's my that? Shaul's like, see you guys later. Go home, right? He's going back home, right? So this is a little bit of Shaul's modesty. Again, we're seeing sign after sign about Shaul's modesty, which the text is clearly portraying in a positive way. But there is a dark side to it. There's a negative side to it, which is all of this modesty, which is important and necessary for the king, is also, when not balanced properly, leading to a vote of no confidence in the people. Right? Many people, strong people, go with him. Whom God touched their heart. However, in verse 27, there was a group of scoundrels, Amru, who said, this is the guy who's going to save us. He's going to lead us in battle. How can he do it? And they demean, they scorn Shaul. And they make it known by not presenting him with a gift. Remember, we talked about one of the signs earlier, the bread. They don't present him with a gift. All of the rest of the people send gifts to Shaul in sign of solidarity that they are with him as a king. These people don't. Vahi kemaharish. What's interesting is Shaul knows that these people don't like him. The message gets back to him. They didn't give him a gift. They said bad things about him. What is Shaul's reaction? Maharish. He's silent. He doesn't say anything back to them. What do you make of that? Everything could be read in both ways, right? On the one hand, we see a certain level of patience, restraint on the part of Shaul. He does not explode for his own honor. He's not somebody who's going to be overbearing on the people because they don't respect him the way he feels that he should be respected. This is a good thing in many ways, because we know one of the challenges of the king is arrogance, haughtiness. The second somebody undermines his kavod, the guy goes wild and starts killing people in a tirade. So this is good on the part of Shaul, that people disrespect him and he holds back. He restrains himself. On the one hand, a very positive quality, something that we would want out of our king, to not explode right away and start killing people. On the other hand, it leaves the door open for, are we going to accept him as king, right? Are people going to follow him? Is he going to be a strong leader? Is he going to be somebody that people could rally around? So these questions hang a little bit in the balance. Next chapter, we're going to see Shaul's first major thing that he does to fight a war. And we're going to see a new side of Shaul that we haven't seen until now. Right now, we've been seeing timid, meek, restrained, humble Shaul. And we've noted that in many ways, that's a good thing. In many ways, it leaves the door open for some problems, namely with these types of people. He's quiet for now. And then we're going to see in next chapter, Shaul is going to really step up his game. He's going to take a little bit more charge, little bit more force against the people when he's ready to fight a war. You're going to see the type of leadership that he will exemplify, which will give us a lot of hope for Shaul's Mincha. Stay tuned for chapter 11 as we begin to develop the malchut of Shaul and see what his kingdom is going to be all about as we continue to move forward in his in the study of Shaul as an amazing figure. Baruch, any questions, comments, thoughts?
So they say now, I've heard that when if someone embarrasses you or insults you or whatever, if you stay quiet, that's like a blessing.
Yeah.
For you.
It's definitely a positive quality, especially amongst great people, again, amongst Talmidei Hachamim. The Rambam writes that even though Torah scholars who are disrespected have the right to excommunicate people, they should not do so. They should learn to hear their shame and dismiss it, not pay attention to it. Just continue to do their thing. That a person should accept their criticism, think about ways that they could be better. If someone's embarrassing them or disrespecting them, take it with what it is, take it from where it's coming from, take it what you could do benefit, not to lash back out at that person. Don't chase back, don't abuse the person back. The rabbis call this tiyeh min hane'elavim, be from those who are disrespected, ve'enam olvim, but do not disrespect others. To a certain degree, Shaul, not to a certain degree, very much so, Shaul is indicative of this trait. He has this trait, his ability to hear his detractors and not pay attention to them and just focus on what he needs to do is very important. And it's a good quality to have, particularly when we know that the pitfall for a king is to overdo it in these areas. Better to be, as the king, a little bit on this extreme. But at the same time, the king does have to uphold his position. If he's going to be mocked and disgraced by the people, it could undermine his leadership and his overall opportunity to help the people. So that's where the balance needs to be stricken. Shaul has to think for himself, I know that I'm not personally offended, but think about, they call it the seal, the office, right? Sometimes you as the president, you as the leader, you as the rabbi, whatever it is, whatever your position of leadership is, you say, I'm not personally offended, but the question is the institution going to go down, right? As a principal of a school, if the kids are mocking you, you might say, look, I don't care, they're kids. It doesn't matter to me. But the problem is if my authority as a principal is undermined, the school might not be able to function. So if you're thinking about not your own kavod, but you're thinking about the kavod of Hashem, you're thinking about the kavod of the institution that needs to be able to function, then you are allowed to go ahead and take action, right? When Korah tries to undermine Moshe, Moshe says, look, he's not in it for his own glory, but he says, if I let Korah win, whose glory is then diminished? God's glory is diminished because I represent that, right? So he's not doing it for his personal reasons, but he needs to protect the office. He needs to protect the seal. And that's really what he has to think about. That's the struggle that Shaul's going to have. We're going to see that Shaul's going to do some great things in these upcoming chapters. A lot of hope for a lot of positive, a lot of optimism are surrounding him, and some great things that we're going to see where he overcomes this challenge and you start to think he's getting it. And then, things will turn aside. We'll see. We'll wait and see. I don't want to ruin it for you because you always know the shoe's about to fall, right? Everyone, I feel like our class is so depressing. Every time something good happens, we're waiting for the other shoe to fall off. But inshallah, we're going to see some really good things. It's important to read the good things too. It's important because Shaul is a great figure, right? He's not a slouch at all by any means.